On Dr. Harsh Deora. He'll be speaking on a survey of all stakeholders in the fellowship landscape in India.
So as you can guess from the crowd that has gathered in the hall, this is really the pulse of the Young Neurosurgeon Forum at this point of time. What do neurosurgeons really at this stage want? To be completely honest with you, the idea of this survey was by my previous speaker, and I, like an elder statesman, have tried to grab his ideas and take all the credit away from him. Here, YNF concludes less than 40 years or within 5 years, whichever is earlier. So what are the challenges for a young neurosurgeon? There are basically two challenges everywhere. One is lack of access to organized teaching or training schemes, as Dr. Vuputri had, and limited number of opportunities for hands-on operating, which everyone has. Is it only in India? Are we the only besotted people who are not given these things? But it is everywhere. If you look very closely, fellowship requirement was there for every specialty. The catch is that there is a fellowship requirement abroad also. So this is a very famous dialogue from a very famous series, which I think everyone faces. There is a scenario of gap between wants and needs for a young neurosurgeon. There is an increasing clamor, as you can see, for everyone being trained in endovascular neurosurgery and endoscopic spine. There is a chiasm between what is available and what we want. And in this survey, I will try to turn the tables also as to what the fellowship directors are looking for and what they can offer. Is there an indigenous solution? Because as you will realize, there is always a need for an indigenous solution. This survey was conducted, as most of you must have got the links in the past 2 or 3 months, and we got the responses from mostly people who are within 5 years of their completion. That is the exact definition of a young neurosurgeon. Most of them, the survey was well divided, as you can see, private, public players, ESI hospitals, research institutes, government hospitals, everything has been represented quite extensively in this survey. Most of them were quite satisfied. However, some of them, a bigger chunk of them were also below expectations and were unsatisfied with their employability here. As you can guess, the deficiency again lies in endoscopic spine and endovascular neurosurgery. But the alarming one really, which opened my eyes here, was functional epilepsy is very badly represented in most of our trainings, as the results of the survey show. Reasons for opting for a fellowship obviously was upgradation, but a new unexposed subspecialization was also important. And the catch here is it increases your hireability or increases your competence at a higher level. The ideal duration of the fellowship here is where the wants and needs start to differ. The ideal duration, according to the responses that we got, was between 3 to 12 months. However, most, as you will realize, are much more than that. Ideal location, this was an eye-opener for me. I always thought that the people would want to go abroad, but as you will see, most of the people want an indigenous solution to this rather than going abroad and doing a fellowship. The reasons, as we asked, as I was also quite confused with this, was market acceptability is more for abroad. Structured training, as Dr. Hemant Vuputri was telling before on, is more in abroad fellowships. However, one of the biggest reasons for an indigenous solution was family commitments, no need for an extra exam. It is suited for the Indian demographic. Technology which is used outside may not exist here. Some people say that the Indian fellowships are more of like an extended residency, language issues, and it being obviously lesser expensive. Major hesitancy, as has been spoken before, is the remuneration, relocation to a center of fellowship, lack of necessity of a fellowship. This I will come to again later. Fear or lack of exposure to general neurosurgery and lack of employment opportunities. Reasons for a subspecialty are interest and marketability both, although I think this is more of a political question rather than a real subjective or an objective answer that has been given. So what specialties are you interested in pursuing? This was the million-dollar question. And there are no surprises here. Everybody, and I mean everybody, just wants to do endovascular neurosurgery, endoscopic cranium and spine. Close third and fourth are spine and skull base. That is it. The idea was to first assess the baseline. So good or excellent training exists for vascular, pediatric, spine, oncology, skull base, and trauma. However, what is lacking and alarmingly lacking is functional epilepsy, endoscopy, and endovascular neurosurgery. What is the current knowledge? Non-operative knowledge. It is again good in vascular, pediatric, spine, oncology, skull base, and trauma. And the usual suspects are always there. It is poor in functional epilepsy, endovascular, and endoscopy. The surgical skills, here is what it starts to differ. Good or excellent surgical skills as is perceived by most is in pediatric, open spine, oncology, skull base, and endoscopic cranium, which is average is vascular neurosurgery, microvascular neurosurgery, pediatric, epilepsy, probably because of the tumor being included in this, and endoscopy. However, what is extremely poor is endovascular neurosurgery, functional and endoscopic spine. Expectation, obviously, as Indians, all I want is everything. We want to learn everything. We want to know everything, which is the case in every specialty. Fear of losing touch of while doing subspecialty. For example, while doing endovascular neurosurgery, do you fear losing your microsurgical skills? It was not really present. The only fellowship where this was slightly pronounced was in spine fellowships, where people thought that they would lose touch with the cranial aspect, which is understandable. Job ability was good in most, and it was not really a question in most of these cases. Nobody wanted a double fellowship, which is quite heartening to see. People were quite focused. Everybody wanted a single fellowship. So now we understood the YNF aspect. What are the fellowship directors offering? So we got in touch with most of the fellowship directors for most of the specialties. As you will see, I have just highlighted the differences between the expectations and what is being offered. Most of the skull-based fellowships are a year, and it is a whole fellowship. That means you are expected to do general neurosurgery also along with subspecialty. And on completion, you will need to know anterior cranial fossa based tumors, petrous drilling, and posterior petrous approaches. That is what they offer. In endovascular neurosurgery, which is the hot favorite here, the duration most of these fellowships offer is of 12 months. It is again, in most cases, you would need to do general neurosurgery also with it, and diagnostic angiograms, at least 50 of them, ECA interventions, carotid artery stentings, thrombectomies, and plus minus coiling of aneurysms are present. In spine fellowships, it is longer, much longer than what is expected, and it is sole plus emergency workup is also needed. In trauma, which is probably the least sought after in this, it was 12 months with multidisciplinary meetings was the major change that would be offered to you after the trauma fellowship. In oncology, multidisciplinary approaches, tumor boards, which is lacking, is being offered by the fellowship directors. In pediatric, the major shift which I noticed which was being offered is that in India, the idea is that pediatric cases are mostly small adults. Elsewhere, anywhere, as most of the people will attest to this, pediatric neurosurgery is a completely different branch which is not done by adult neurosurgeons. So this is what was being offered, and it is a more holistic fellowship because you do pediatric spine, craniofacial, endoscopy, epilepsy, functional, everything in pediatric. Endoscopic cranium is basic skull-based endoscopy, pituitaries, ETV, and extended endoscopic exposure. And functional epilepsy, although it is more required, but it needs a large team, which was being told by the fellowship directors, although there is a plenty of opportunity to scale. Now we compare this to most of the people around. This was a large WFNS survey, 2,000 neurosurgeons were done, and everybody, most of them wanted to do endovascular followed by spine, which mirrors what we also want. Has the preference changed over time? I'll take my time on this slide. If you see very closely, cerebrovascular and endovascular was nothing before 1980s. Nobody wanted to do it. If you see, the change has been dramatic. Whereas if you see certain specialties like trauma and pediatric has almost remained constant, spine has grown tremendously from that time, and other specialties such as oncology or stereotactic and functional have either reduced or approximately remained the same. This is one area which I probably feel most of the people, Dr. Sudarshan, if he's sitting in the crowd, was questioning this, that do we actually need research in MS? There's a very startling fact which I wanted to highlight, which I added just before this. More than 30% of institutions who offer MCH or DNB degrees in India have not published a single article, be it case reports, letter to editor, in the past 5 years. This is published, and this is a fact. There is a difference between fellowship people and non-fellowship people in terms of research, but it is quite significant. This is something which we need. There is a committee of advanced subspecialty training, CAST, which was established in US and North America not so long back. They are the body responsible for accreditation of fellowships in that place. We have an accreditation coming soon for residency. This is something we need to look at. We are not that far behind. It is hardly 5 or 10 years difference when they did it, and we can do it definitely at our place. This is a trauma model that trauma fellowship offers. You see, you start from the history and you start doing advanced procedures for TBI by the time you finish your fellowship. This is the model which we need to follow. Personal take always is that you need to understand, as my previous speaker told, that uh, uh, no amount of handholding will prepare you for everything in neurosurgery, but without proper training, you will revert to being a barber, which we were before. Learn basic neurosurgery before going for a fellowship. These are the cases you would probably learn before you start thinking of doing a fellowship. But this has to be learned before. You cannot go for a fellowship the day you pass. Probably it will do more harm to you rather than good. I had myself gone for a fellowship before, but I had thought at that time pediatric probably is not a major difference. But if you, as you can see, somebody was talking about selective dorsal rhizotomy yesterday. The difference in setup, the difference in approaches is completely different, and you would try to do it. The problem for me before I went was this quote, that what gets you into trouble is not what you don't know. It is what you know for sure that just ain't so. I thought that I knew what is pediatric, but I was terribly and sadly mistaken. So to conclude, trends clearly favor endovascular neurosurgery and endoscopic spine. Poor exposure to functional and epilepsy is alarming. While the want is for 3 to 12 months, the need is for 12 to 24 months. Trauma is extremely unfavored and neglected for reasons unknown to me. Skull-based oncology and pediatric are steady and but poorly sought. Endoscopic skull-based functional epilepsy are sought, but manpower and equipment will be a hindrance to you. There is a need for structuring and accreditation, which is extremely strong at this point of time. We are clearly in line with global trends, though a few years behind. This begets the question, what is the future of neurosurgery as of now? Because if everybody wants to do endovascular and endoscopic spine, it's a thing which needs to be considered. I would like to leave you with this image. Listen to me carefully when I say this. This is a heavyweight boxer who does a combination of shots to knock out his opponent. You will see the long arm jab coming from the right and the uppercut which knocks out coming from the right. Here the long arm jab is as your basic neurosurgery training, and the knockout punch is your fellowship. Triumph is usually a balancing act where both your hands are needed. Thank you very much.